Ertuğrul Ghazi, the warrior who dreamed an empire. In the windswept plains of Central Asia, where the earth met the sky in endless horizons, a boy was born whose name would echo across centuries, Ertuğrul. His story begins not with riches or crowns, but with hardship, migration, and the struggle for survival. The 13th century was a time of upheaval for the Turkic tribes. The once mighty Seljuk Empire was crumbling under the pressure of both external invasions and internal divisions, leaving the frontier lands vulnerable and unstable. It was in this turbulent backdrop that Ertuğrul first opened his eyes, not yet aware of the destiny that awaited him. The Kaya tribe to which Ertuğrul belonged was small in number but proud in spirit. They were august Turks, descendants of a lineage known for resilience, courage, and a deep devotion to their faith. Life in the tribe was harsh, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the dangers of the frontier. Yet from a young age, Ertuğrul showed traits that separated him from others: an inquisitive mind, a strong sense of justice, and above all, an unshakable courage. His childhood was not spent in comfort, but in the open steppes where the bow and sword were as natural to a boy as play. The elders often spoke of valor, of Ghazis who fought not merely for land but for faith, and these tales burned deep within him. He trained tirelessly, learning to ride until horse and rider moved as one, to draw the bow with precision, and to wield the sword with both strength and mercy. But more than martial skill, it was Ertuğrul's spirit that set him apart. He was known for his empathy, often standing up for the weak among the tribe, a rare quality in an age where survival demanded harshness. Stories spread of the boy who would defend shepherds against raiders or share his meal with orphans. For his people, who longed for hope amid uncertainty, Ertuğrul became a symbol of promise. The dawn of a warrior is not marked by victories, but by trials that forge character. Ertuğrul's early years were filled with such trials. His tribe faced hunger, rival tribes sought dominance, and the spectre of great empires, Byzantine to the west and Mongol to the east, cast a shadow over their fragile existence. Each challenge hardened him, teaching patience, discipline, and the art of leadership. In the quiet moments by the fire, when the stars stretched across the blackened sky, he would listen to the wisdom of his father, Süleyman Shah. His father spoke not only of survival, but of honor, faith, and destiny, principles that would guide Ertuğrul for the rest of his life. It was under this guidance that the young warrior began to see beyond himself, to understand that his life was part of something greater, the survival and flourishing of his people. The dawn of Ertuğrul's journey was not accompanied by the clash of armies or the conquest of lands. Instead, it was born in silence, in the heart of a boy who carried within him the dreams of his ancestors. In him, the seeds of greatness were quietly sown, waiting for the call of destiny that would soon thunder across the steppes. The 13th century was an age of turbulence for the Turkic peoples of the steppes. What had once been a mighty and unified order was now fractured. The Seljuk Sultanate, which for generations had provided both protection and a sense of belonging, was in decline. Its central authority weakened, and its provinces were increasingly ruled by ambitious emirs who placed personal power above unity. For the countless Turkmen tribes roaming Anatolia and beyond, this collapse meant uncertainty, dislocation, and peril. The Turkmen tribes, including Ertuğrul's Kayu, were nomadic in nature. Their wealth lay not in stone cities or treasuries, but in their herds. Their horses, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. Yet their way of life placed them constantly in the path of danger. To the west, the Byzantine Empire clung to its borders, wary of the Turkish influx. To the east, a storm was brewing that would soon engulf the world, the Mongols. For the Turkmen, survival became a delicate dance between powerful neighbors, shifting alliances, and endless migrations in search of safe pasture. Disputes among tribes further deepened their woes. Rival clans fought bitterly over land, water, and honor. Small skirmishes often escalated into wars that drained strength and spilled blood unnecessarily. Amid this turmoil, the people longed for strong leadership, someone who could rise above petty rivalries and guide them to safety. The Kai tribe found itself constantly on the move, driven by both necessity and hope. Hunger and raids threatened their existence, and with each passing year, the need for wise leadership grew. Ertuğrul, though still young, was observing closely. He saw how disunity made them vulnerable, how ambition could turn brother against brother, and how fear paralyzed decision-making. These lessons would shape his vision of leadership. The disarray of the Turkmen world was not merely political, but also spiritual. Sufi mystics and dervishes traveled through the lands, reminding the tribes of their faith and identity. In a time when survival often meant compromise, these men of devotion urged resilience, reminding the people that they were more than wanderers. They were the torchbearers of a faith destined to endure. Among those voices, Ertuğrul would later find guidance that strengthened his resolve. For the Byzantines, the disunity of the Turks was a chance to reclaim lands. For the Mongols, it was an opportunity to crush fragmented foes. But for Ertuğrul and his people, it was a crucible. In this chaos, the foundations of future greatness were being laid. The very turmoil that threatened to destroy the tribes also tested them, shaping the strongest into leaders, warriors, and visionaries. Ertuğrul watched as neighboring tribes fell to ruin, some enslaved, others scattered, a few absorbed by stronger clans. He knew the same fate could befall the Kai if they did not unite under purpose, and yet he also believed that within every trial lay the spark of destiny. The disunity of the age could not extinguish the yearning for something greater, a home, a land, a state where his people could live in dignity. In the turmoil of the tribes, Ertuğrul began to glimpse his own path, not as a mere warrior bound to his sword, but as a leader destined to rise from chaos, to guide his people through storms, and to plant the first seeds of what would one day grow into empire. The birth of leadership. Leadership is not inherited like wealth, nor granted by decree. It is born in the crucible of trial, where men are tested, and only the resolute rise. For Ertuğrul, the moment of leadership came when his tribe faced despair and doubt, when survival itself hung by a thread. The Kai tribe had endured years of migration. Hunger stalked their camps, and enemies lurked on every horizon. In these bleak times, the people sought strength in their chief, Süleyman Shah. Yet fate is cruel. During a migration across the mighty Euphrates River, tragedy struck. The great leader was lost to its unforgiving waters. The grief was heavy, for Süleyman Shah had been not only a father to Ertuğrul, but a guide to all his people. The tribe was left fractured. Some wished to return eastward, to seek refuge under distant Seljuk rulers. Others argued for scattering, joining stronger clans to ensure survival. The fire of unity flickered weakly, ready to be extinguished. It was then that Ertuğrul, though still young, rose with words and actions that would change their course forever. He did not promise comfort, nor did he disguise the hardships that awaited them. Instead, he reminded his people of who they were, the Kayu, heirs of a proud lineage, protectors of their faith, a people destined not to dissolve into obscurity, but to carve out a place of honor. His voice, filled with conviction, rekindled hope among the weary. He spoke not as a dreamer, but as one willing to shoulder the burdens of all. Ertuğrul's first act of leadership was not a battle won, but a decision made. To lead his tribe westward into Anatolia, toward lands where opportunity and danger mingled in equal measure. It was a bold choice, for the journey would bring them face to face with both Byzantine might and Mongol expansion. But it was also a choice that signaled vision, the vision of a homeland where his people could thrive, free from fear. As they journeyed, Ertuğrul's qualities emerged ever more clearly. He was patient when others were rash, decisive when hesitation meant disaster, and merciful even in moments of strength. His ability to balance courage with wisdom earned him the trust of his warriors and the devotion of his tribe. The young leader was no tyrant demanding loyalty. He was a guide who inspired it. This period also revealed Ertuğrul's deep sense of justice. When disputes arose among the people, he judged fairly, without favoritism. When neighboring tribes sought aid, he offered it, even at risk to his own. In his actions, the Kayu saw not just a chieftain, but a man who embodied the principles they longed to follow. The birth of leadership is often subtle, marked not by thunder but by steady light. For Ertuğrul it was the light of faith, vision, and duty. By the time the Kaya had crossed into new lands, there was no doubt. He was their bey, their leader, the one destined to carry them through the storms that loomed ahead. The call of destiny. Destiny seldom announces itself with clarity. It whispers in trials, it hides in chance encounters, and it reveals itself only to those prepared to answer its call. For Ertuğrul, that call came in a moment that would change the fate of his tribe, and in time, the fate of empires. As the Kaya journeyed through Anatolia, weary and searching for refuge, they came upon a battlefield where the Byzantines clashed with the Seljuks. The Seljuk forces, smaller and overwhelmed, were on the brink of annihilation. To most, this was not their fight. To involve themselves would risk destruction. But to Ertuğrul, it was the hand of destiny stretched before him. He saw that to act was perilous, yet to turn away would be a betrayal of both honor and opportunity. Without hesitation, he and his warriors rode into the fray. The Kaya horsemen, swift and fierce, struck the Byzantines with a force they did not expect. What had seemed a hopeless battle turned, and the Seljuks were saved from certain defeat. This act of courage did not go unnoticed. The Seljuk Sultan, astonished by the valor of this small tribe, rewarded Ertuğrul with lands near the Byzantine frontier. It was not just land, it was a chance for the Kayu to settle, to root themselves, and to build. This moment was more than a gift of territory. It was destiny unfolding. Ertuğrul had chosen the harder path, and in doing so earned recognition, allies, and a foothold in the very land that would one day give rise to empire. It was the first sign that his people were not wanderers doomed to fade, but pioneers laying foundations for greatness. Yet the call of destiny is never a single moment. It is a path marked by sacrifice and faith. Ertuğrul knew that with land came responsibility, and with recognition came enemies. The Byzantines would not tolerate Turkish settlers on their frontier. Rival Turkic tribes, jealous of the Kayu's fortune, would plot against them. Even within his own people, voices of doubt would murmur. But Ertuğrul pressed on. He saw beyond the present. Where others saw only survival, he saw the possibility of a homeland defended by faith and honor. His tribe was small, but with unity and purpose. It was this unshakable belief that made him not just a leader of men, but a leader of destiny. In the silence of the night, under the same stars that guided their ancestors, Ertuğrul must have reflected on the choices before him, to step into battles not his own, to claim lands fraught with danger, to lead a people weary of exile. These were heavy burdens. Yet within him burned a conviction that this path, though perilous, was the one chosen for him. The call of destiny is not answered with words, but with deeds. And in that moment on the battlefield, when he chose action over fear, Ertuğrul answered it fully. The course of history shifted, and the Kaya tribe, once wanderers of the steppe, began their transformation into the founders of an enduring legacy. Clash with the Byzantines. The frontier of Anatolia was no peaceful refuge. It was a land scarred by centuries of war, where castles loomed on rocky hillsides and villages lived in constant fear of raids. For the Byzantines, these frontiers were the last defense of their empire, a shield against the advancing Turks. For the Turks, they were both opportunity and danger, a testing ground for survival. It was here, on this razor's edge, that Ertuğrul and the Kayu tribe made their stand. The Byzantines did not take kindly to the presence of a new Turkish settlement on their borders. To them, the arrival of Ertuğrul's people was not just an intrusion, it was a threat. Small bands of Byzantine soldiers harassed the Kaya, seeking to drive them back into the wilderness. But Ertuğrul was no ordinary tribal chief. He understood that every skirmish was more than a clash of swords. It was a battle for legitimacy, for the right of his people to remain. The first clashes were swift and brutal. Byzantine raiders descended on Kaya pastures, seeking to steal livestock and strike fear. Yet instead of retreat, they met resistance. Ertuğrul's warriors, hardened by years of migration, fought with ferocity. Their mastery of horseback combat, their speed and their discipline gave them the edge. Again and again they repelled the enemy, proving that the Kaya were not wanderers to be scattered, but defenders rooted to their land. These victories, though small, carried great weight. Each triumph strengthened morale, each defense tightened unity. The people saw in their bey a leader who would not bow to fear, who met threats head-on with courage. Ertuğrul's name began to spread beyond his tribe. To friends he was a protector, to rivals a rising force, to enemies a man to be reckoned with. The Byzantines, recognizing his growing strength, escalated their efforts. Skirmishes turned into battles, and soon castles became the targets of Ertuğrul's campaigns. With cunning strategy, he struck swiftly at enemy strongholds, weakening their grip on the land. His victories brought not only security but also captives, spoils, and new respect among neighboring tribes. Yet Ertuğrul's vision was not merely of conquest. He sought more than plunder. Where the Byzantines ruled with fear, he sought to establish justice. Captured villagers were often treated with mercy, a stark contrast to the brutality of the age. This earned him allies where enemies had once stood, for mercy in times of war was rarer than victory. The clash with the Byzantines was more than the struggle of a tribe against an empire. It was the shaping of a warrior into a statesman. Ertuğrul proved that survival did not lie only in the sword, but in wisdom, in faith, and in justice. Through fire and blood, he carved a place for his people on the frontier, a foothold that would, in time, become the cradle of empire. The Byzantines would strike again and again, but they could not extinguish the resolve of the Kaya. For with every battle their roots grew deeper in Anatolian soil, and the name of Ertuğrul Ghazi carried further on the winds of history. The Mongol storm. While the Byzantines pressed from the west, a far greater menace swept across the east. The Mongols, like a tidal wave, their armies thundered through Asia, leaving kingdoms shattered and cities reduced to ashes. No empire seemed safe. The great Khwarezmian state had been obliterated, and even the Seljuks trembled before their advance. For the Turkmen tribes of Anatolia, the Mongols were not just another foe. They were the embodiment of destruction itself. The Mongols struck fear into every heart. Tales spread of their armies moving like shadows, their horsemen swift as the wind, their cruelty unmatched. Villages burned, captives were slaughtered, and entire populations scattered. Refugees poured into Anatolia, bringing with them stories of horror. To the Kaya, these stories were not distant warnings. They were omens of trials to come. Ertuğrul knew that the Mongols were unlike any enemy his people had faced. Their numbers were vast, their discipline unmatched, their strategies devastating. Against such a force, mere courage was not enough. It would take cunning, alliances, and faith to survive. When the Mongols pushed into Anatolia, chaos followed. Tribes that had once been rivals now sought protection under any banner that could shield them. The Seljuks, weakened by internal strife, struggled to mount a defense. Many looked to Ertuğrul, whose leadership had already proven itself against the Byzantines. He became a figure of hope, not only for the Kayı, but for others seeking refuge from the storm. In battles against Mongol raiders, Ertuğrul displayed both bravery and strategy. He avoided direct confrontation with overwhelming forces, instead striking with speed, ambushing their detachments, and vanishing into the hills before retribution could fall. It was a war of survival, where wisdom outweighed brute force. His ability to adapt, to turn weakness into strength, kept his people alive when others fell to ruin. But the Mongol threat was not only military, it was political. Many Turkic beys submitted to Mongol overlords, hoping to preserve their tribes through allegiance. Ertuğrul, however, chose a different path. He refused to bend to tyranny, holding fast to the belief that true strength lay in independence, in preserving honor even at great risk. This stance won him admiration among his people, though it also marked him as a target of Mongol wrath. Through these trials, the faith of the Kayı deepened. Dervishes and scholars reminded them that hardship was a test, that victory did not belong to numbers, but to the steadfast. Ertuğrul himself leaned heavily on this conviction. His leadership was not merely martial, but spiritual, guiding his people with the belief that they were chosen for a purpose beyond survival. The Mongol storm raged on, reshaping the lands of Anatolia. Yet the Kaya endured. Against all odds, they remained unbroken, their unity intact, their leader unyielding. For Ertuğrul, the storm was more than a danger. It was a forge. In the fires of Mongol wrath, his resolve hardened, his vision sharpened. The storm that destroyed kingdoms became the crucible that prepared him for even greater trials. The seeds of empire. Every great empire begins not with conquest, but with vision. For Ertuğrul, the years of struggle against Byzantines and Mongols were not merely about survival. They were about planting the seeds of something far greater, a state, a home, a legacy that would endure beyond his lifetime. The land granted to him by the Seljuk Sultan was small, a frontier region near Soğut and Dominik. To outsiders, it seemed insignificant, a strip of borderland caught between hostile powers. Yet in Ertuğrul's eyes, it was fertile soil for destiny. Here his people could settle, defend themselves, and build the foundations of a future that had long been denied to the wandering Kayu. He fortified villages, encouraged farming, and established justice. Under his leadership, Soğut became more than a frontier outpost. It became a sanctuary where Turkmen could find refuge and security. Each family that joined the Kayu added strength, and each new settlement expanded their presence. Slowly, what was once a fragile tribe transformed into a small but stable principality. Ertuğrul's governance was marked by fairness. He ensured that disputes were resolved swiftly, that taxes were just, and that protection was extended not only to Muslims but also to Christians who lived under his authority. This tolerance distinguished him from many rulers of his age and won him loyalty across divides. To those weary of oppression, the Kayu lands became a beacon of hope. Strategically, Ertuğrul positioned his people with foresight. By holding the frontier against Byzantines, he not only secured safety, but also earned lasting favor from the Seljuk sultans, who relied on him as a bulwark. Warriors seeking honor gravitated toward his banner, swelling the ranks of his army. It was during this time that the Kayu began to dream of permanence. No longer were they simply wanderers with tents and herds. They were settlers, shaping towns and defending fortresses. The tribe's identity evolved, from nomads of the steppe to pioneers of a new order. And at the heart of it stood Ertuğrul, whose leadership transformed uncertainty into stability, exile into belonging. Yet Ertuğrul never mistook these early steps for the culmination of his journey. He saw them as beginnings, as seeds sown in soil watered by struggle and nurtured by faith. He often reminded his people that their efforts were not only for themselves, but for generations yet to come. The shade of the tree they were planting would be enjoyed by their children's children. The seeds of empire are not visible to those who live only in the moment. But to Ertuğrul they were clear. In the steady growth of his tribe, in the loyalty of his warriors, in the justice of his rule, he saw the outlines of a future far greater than the world could then imagine. A future that in time would bear the name of Osman, his son, his heir, the founder of an empire destined to last for centuries. Brotherhood and betrayal. No leader rises without facing trials of loyalty. For Ertuğrul, the fiercest battles were not always against enemies on the field, but against the divisions within his own kin. Brotherhood was his greatest strength, yet betrayal lurked where trust was deepest. The Kayu tribe, like many others, was built on bonds of family and allegiance. Ertuğrul had brothers who shared his blood, and among them lay both support and rivalry. After the death of their father, Süleyman Shah, disagreements arose over the future of the tribe. Some wished to retreat eastward, to seek safety under the Mongols or the Seljuks. Ertuğrul, however, pressed westward, toward danger, but also toward opportunity. These conflicting visions sowed seeds of discord that would haunt their journey. His brother Dündar, though loyal in moments, often wavered. Fearful of threats, he counseled submission or retreat when boldness was required. On more than one occasion, his hesitations endangered the tribe, forcing Ertuğrul to balance patience with firmness. Other beys within the Kayı, ambitious for power, questioned his decisions, whispering doubts among the people. To lead was to carry not only the sword, but also the burden of suspicion. Betrayal was not always born of malice. Sometimes it came from fear, from short-sightedness, from the inability to see beyond the present. Yet for Ertuğrul, the pain was no less. To fight an enemy was simple. To contend with doubt within one's own tribe was a deeper wound. Still, Ertuğrul managed these rifts with remarkable wisdom. He did not silence opposition with tyranny, nor did he abandon discipline for the sake of peace. Instead, he sought balance, listening to counsel where it had merit, but standing firm when destiny demanded courage. His leadership was a constant test of patience, his resolve sharpened by the trials of family and tribe. Yet betrayal sometimes came in darker forms. Rivals aligned with Byzantines or Mongols, seeking advantage through treachery. Plots were woven in secret, alliances made in shadows. Ertuğrul faced conspiracies not only from enemies beyond his borders, but from within his own circle. Each betrayal was a wound, yet each also revealed the resilience of his people, who time and again rallied behind the leader who had never forsaken them. Brotherhood, however, was not only a source of pain. It was also Ertuğrul's greatest pillar. Loyal companions like Turgut Alp, Abdurrahman, and others became living symbols of devotion. They stood by him in every battle, their swords extensions of their trust. These bonds of loyalty shone brightest in the face of betrayal, proving that true brotherhood could outlast treachery. The story of Ertuğrul's rise is as much about betrayal as it is about loyalty. For every hand that faltered, another grasped the sword with firmer resolve. In this balance of faith and doubt, loyalty and treachery, the character of the Kayı was forged, allies and rivals. In the turbulent frontiers of Anatolia, no tribe could stand entirely alone. Alliances were as vital as swords, and rivals could be as dangerous as open enemies. Ertuğrul, ever the strategist, understood this truth well. His rise was not only through valor in battle, but through the careful weaving of friendships and the management of enmities. Among his earliest and most crucial allies were neighboring Turkmen tribes. Some had grown weary of endless migrations, while others admired the justice and strength of the Kayı. Ertuğrul welcomed them, offering both protection and partnership. His banner became a gathering point for warriors who longed for more than survival, for a cause worth fighting for. Each new ally added numbers and morale, swelling the strength of his principality. The Seljuks, though weakened, also remained important allies. Ertuğrul's defense of their frontiers against Byzantines had earned him their recognition, and though their empire faltered, their favor provided legitimacy. With their backing, Ertuğrul secured lands, resources, and a position that other tribes could not easily challenge. His loyalty to the Seljuk Sultan, even in times of instability, was both pragmatic and principled. But allies were never without risk. The politics of Anatolia were treacherous, where today's friend could become tomorrow's foe. Rival tribes watched the growing power of the Kayı with envy. Some sought to undermine Ertuğrul by forging ties with the Byzantines, others with the Mongols. Betrayal could be cloaked in diplomacy, and more than once an ally's promise crumbled at the edge of battle. The Byzantines themselves were both enemy and at times reluctant partner. Local lords, desperate to protect their holdings from Mongols or rival Turks, occasionally negotiated with Ertuğrul. These fragile truces, however, rarely lasted. The frontier was too unstable, the ambitions too great for peace to endure. Yet Ertuğrul's genius lay in his ability to navigate these shifting sands. He did not rely solely on the sword, but on wisdom, patience, and foresight. He knew when to extend the hand of alliance, when to wield the sword of justice, and when to stand firm in defiance. His reputation grew not only as a warrior but as a statesman, capable of balancing power among friends and rivals alike. Through these alliances and rivalries, the Kayu tribe expanded its influence. Each alliance added strength, each rivalry tested resilience. Step by step, Ertuğrul carved out a position not just as a tribal leader, but as a frontier prince whose voice carried weight across Anatolia. It was in this delicate balance of diplomacy and battle that the seeds of empire continued to grow. For no empire rises without allies to strengthen it and rivals to sharpen it. And in the crucible of Anatolia's frontier, Ertuğrul proved himself master of both. Faith and resolve. At the heart of Ertuğrul Ghazi's journey lay a force more enduring than steel, more unshakable than stone: faith. For the Kayu, survival was not merely a matter of strength, but of belief. In every battle, in every trial, Ertuğrul carried the conviction that his cause was righteous, guided by the hand of destiny and by the will of Allah. The frontier was a place of uncertainty, where fear and doubt could easily break a tribe. Yet Ertuğrul infused his people with resolve by grounding them in faith. Mosques and masjids were built in the lands they settled, reminding all who dwelt there that their lives were part of something greater. Scholars and dervishes traveled with the tribe, carrying wisdom and spiritual strength as vital as food or weapons. Foremost among these was Sheikh Edebali, whose counsel shaped Ertuğrul's vision. The Sheikh's words were not mere teachings, but guiding stars. From him, Ertuğrul drew the conviction that the Kayu were destined for more than survival. They were chosen to carry justice across the land. This faith became his compass, pointing him forward even in the darkest of times. Faith was also the source of resilience. When hunger gnawed at the tribe, when betrayal struck from within, when enemies closed in from all sides, Ertuğrul turned to prayer before strategy. His belief steadied him when others faltered. To his people, this unwavering trust in Allah was proof that their leader was chosen not just by circumstance, but by divine design. Resolve was the twin to faith. Where faith provided vision, resolve gave it life. Ertuğrul did not waver once he had chosen a path. His people learned that their survival depended on endurance as much as courage. Women and men alike bore hardships without surrender. They crossed mountains, endured winters, and fought battles beyond their numbers, sustained by a collective spirit of resolve that no enemy could extinguish. This union of faith and resolve became the soul of the Kayu. It was what bound them when fear threatened to scatter them, what lifted them when loss pressed them down. Faith gave them hope, resolve gave them strength, and Ertuğrul embodied both in his life. Through him, the Kayu discovered that victory was not only won on the battlefield but also in the heart. A tribe that believed, endured, and held fast to its resolve could outlast empires. And in this spirit, Ertuğrul shaped not only warriors, but believers, not only survivors, but dreamers of destiny. The final battles. Time is the greatest adversary of all leaders, and for Ertuğrul Ghazi, the passing years brought both triumphs and trials. The once nomadic warrior who had led his people through mountains and deserts now stood as the master of a principality, his banner respected and his enemies wary. But even in his later years, the frontier gave no rest. The Byzantines, though beaten back many times, remained determined to hold their strongholds. Skirmishes along the border flared constantly. Ertuğrul, though older, still rode with his men, his sword flashing in the sun as fiercely as in his youth. His presence alone was enough to inspire courage. His very name had become a weapon that unsettled enemies before the clash of steel. At the same time, the Mongols continued to cast their shadow. Though Ertuğrul had outmaneuvered them, their influence remained a threat. Their puppet governors in Anatolia sought to curb the growing independence of tribes like the Kai. Some battles were fought not with armies but with diplomacy, where Ertuğrul's wisdom proved as sharp as his blade. In these final battles, victory was not measured in lands alone, but in survival and consolidation. Every raid repelled, every alliance secured, every village defended was another stone in the foundation of the future. Ertuğrul knew he was not only fighting for his tribe, but for generations yet unborn. It was during this time that his son Osman began to emerge. Young, brave, and keen-eyed, Osman rode beside his father, learning the art of war and the weight of leadership. The final campaigns of Ertuğrul were also the first lessons of Osman, the passing of the torch from one generation to the next. The son would carry forward the battles the father had begun. The last campaigns were fierce but decisive. By the end of his years, Ertuğrul had secured the lands around Soğut and Domaniç, carving a homeland from the chaos of Anatolia. The Kayu, once wanderers, now had soil to call their own. Fields were ploughed, markets grew, mosques rose, and life began to root itself in permanence. As age bore down upon him, Ertuğrul's sword arm weakened, but his resolve did not. His final victories were not only on the battlefield, but in the lasting stability he left behind. His people, hardened by years of struggle, now stood strong, united, and ready for what was to come. And so as his final battles faded into memory, Ertuğrul Ghazi prepared to leave this world, knowing that his work was not in vain. The warrior who had fought through storms, betrayals, and countless enemies had given his people a future. His fight was ending, but their destiny was only beginning. Legacy of a Ghazi. When Ertuğrul Ghazi passed from this world, he left behind more than a principality, more than victories, more than land. He left behind a legacy, a living spirit that would outlast empires, echoing through the centuries as both inspiration and foundation. The title Ghazi was not lightly given. It signified more than a warrior. It marked one who fought in the path of faith, one whose sword defended justice and belief. Ertuğrul had lived that title fully. His battles were not for personal glory, but for the survival and dignity of his people, for the defense of Islam and for the vision of a future greater than his own lifetime. His legacy was first felt in the Kaya tribe itself. No longer wanderers, no longer scattered refugees, they had become a people bound by identity and destiny. The homeland secured by Ertuğrul gave them roots, while his leadership gave them purpose. His people remembered not only his victories, but his fairness, his justice, and his unwavering faith. Beyond the Kaya, his legacy spread to all of Anatolia. The Seljuks honored him, other tribes admired him, and even his enemies respected him. His name became a symbol of courage on the frontier, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, faith and resolve could carve out triumph. Most of all, his legacy was carried by his son Osman. Ertuğrul's teachings, his example and his vision took root in Osman's heart. Where the father had defended, the son would conquer. Where the father had planted seeds, the son would harvest empires. The Osmanlı dynasty, the Ottomans, would rise from the foundation Ertuğrul had built. In time, stories of Ertuğrul would pass into legend. Songs and epics carried his deeds across villages and generations. To many, he was not merely a leader of one tribe, but a hero of the entire Muslim world, a man whose faith lit the path for centuries of conquest, justice, and civilization. Even in death, Ertuğrul Ghazi lived on. His tomb in Söğüt became a place of honor, where warriors and rulers alike came to pay respect. The empire his son built never forgot the man who had given them their beginning. His name was invoked in prayers, in oaths, in the annals of history, reminding all who heard it that greatness is born from struggle, sacrifice, and unshakable faith. The legacy of Ertuğrul Ghazi was not confined to the past. It was alive, a torch passed through time, illuminating the path from a small principality on the frontier to one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. The dream of an empire. Long before the banners of the Ottomans flew across continents, long before their cannons thundered at the walls of Constantinople, there was a dream. That dream lived first in the heart of Ertuğrul Ghazi. It was not a dream of riches or fleeting conquest. It was a vision of permanence, of a state rooted in justice, faith, and unity. Ertuğrul believed that his people were destined for more than survival. Their hardships, their battles, their wanderings, all were leading them toward a greater purpose. Sheikh Edebali gave voice to this vision in words that echoed across generations. He spoke of a tree that would grow from a small seed, whose branches would stretch across the world, offering shade and justice to countless souls. Ertuğrul listened, and though he knew he would not live to see the tree in its fullness, he nurtured the soil in which it would grow. The dream of empire began humbly, with the lands around Söğüt. Villages were protected, markets thrived, the call to prayer echoed freely. It was in these small victories that the foundation of empire was laid. For an empire is not born in a moment. It is built through years of sacrifice, patience, and faith. Ertuğrul's dream lived on in Osman. The son saw not only what his father had achieved, but what he had envisioned. Osman carried the banner forward, forging the Ottoman Beylik from the soil his father had secured. In his victories, one could see the realization of Ertuğrul's unspoken hope that the Kaya would one day rise beyond tribe and frontier, to become a people who shaped history itself. From that dream, an empire emerged. It would endure for 6 centuries, stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa. It would become a power that rivaled and surpassed Rome, Byzantium, and Persia. And at its root, in the soil of Söğüt, in the faith of the Kaya, in the vision of Ertuğrul Ghazi, the dream had first taken root. The dream of empire was more than ambition, it was destiny. And it began with a man who believed against all odds that his people were chosen for greatness. Eternal legacy. Centuries have passed since the days when Ertuğrul Ghazi rode across the frontiers of Anatolia, yet his presence endures. His name is spoken with reverence, his story retold with pride, his legacy felt in ways both vast and intimate. For he was not merely the father of Osman, nor only the founder of a principality. He was the spark of an empire, the beginning of a destiny that reshaped the world. The Ottoman Empire that grew from his line carried his spirit at its core. Sultans, generals, and statesmen looked back to Ertuğrul as the model of courage and faith. His struggles against Byzantines and Mongols became the archetype of frontier warfare. His leadership a guide for rulers who sought justice alongside power. To the Ottomans, he was more than an ancestor. He was the standard by which their greatness was measured. His tomb in Söğüt became a place of pilgrimage, not only for his descendants, but for all who drew inspiration from his life. Each year, generations gathered to honor him, reaffirming the bond between past and present. The stones of his resting place whispered stories of battles fought, of prayers answered, of hopes fulfilled. It was here that the empire remembered its roots, never forgetting the man who had given them their beginning. But Ertuğrul's legacy was not bound to the Ottomans alone. His story crossed borders and centuries, becoming part of the shared memory of the Muslim world. In his life, people found the timeless virtues of honor, sacrifice, and faith. He stood as a reminder that greatness is born not from ease but from struggle, not from wealth but from resilience, not from ambition alone but from belief in something higher. Even today his legacy breathes. In books, in films, in the tales told around firesides, Ertuğrul Ghazi's life continues to inspire. He is remembered not only as a warrior, but as a symbol of justice, faith, and perseverance. To many, he represents the eternal truth that one man's vision, guided by belief and strengthened by resolve, can shape the course of history for centuries. The eternal legacy of Ertuğrul Ghazi is not written solely in the empire that bore his name, but in the hearts of those who still look to him as a hero. His life reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, faith can move nations, courage can carve futures, and vision can build empires. And so, though his body rests beneath the soil of Söğüt, his spirit rides still, across the pages of history, across the memories of nations, across the dreams of all who believe that destiny favors the brave. Ertuğrul Ghazi remains eternal, his legacy living on as long as courage, faith, and justice endure in the world.